The apartment was silent except for the faint humming of city lights outside the window. A young man named Daniel sat alone on a sofa that looked expensive but felt cold beneath him. He was 32 years old, but the exhaustion in his eyes belonged to someone far older. His phone screen glowed in the dim room, casting a pale reflection on his face. Daniel scrolled through a dating application, moving through faces the way someone might flip through channels on a television. He did not realize he was looking for something deeper than a date. He was looking for something he had never been taught how to build. He swiped left. He swiped right. Each movement was quick, thoughtless, and mechanical. He stopped only long enough to read a line from a profile before moving on to the next person. No one seemed real. No one seemed permanent. The world had taught him that everything had an alternative, including people. Daniel put the phone down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He lived in an apartment that cost more than his father's first house, yet he felt emptier than he ever believed possible. He shared no meals. He made no promises. He kept no commitments. He felt a loneliness he could not name. Outside, the traffic light changed from red to green. Inside, nothing in his life seemed to move at all. 50 miles away, in a quiet town surrounded by fields and old fences, Daniel's father sat in a small living room. His name was Joseph, and he was 72 years old. He sat in the same armchair he had purchased with his wife almost 50 years earlier. The leather was cracked, and the color had faded, but Joseph never replaced it. It held too many memories. On the wall hung a framed black and white photograph taken in the year 1963. In it, a young Joseph wore a simple suit. His wife, Margaret, stood beside him wearing a dress she had sewn herself. Their children, 3 of them, stood at their feet. Everyone was smiling, not because life was perfect, but because life was shared. Joseph looked at that photograph often because it reminded him of a time when promises were not temporary, when a vow was not just words spoken at an altar, but a lifelong commitment. A time when a man married with the understanding that marriage was not an experiment but a covenant. A time when a woman chose a partner with the knowledge that the path ahead would not always be easy, but they would walk it together. Daniel did not understand that world. The modern world had raised him differently. In Joseph's era, people expected difficulty. They embraced responsibility. They believed family was built through sacrifice and steady perseverance. Today, Daniel lived in a culture that promised happiness without hardship. A culture that told him he deserved perfection at all times. A culture that encouraged people to leave relationships the moment they felt discomfort or boredom. One evening, Daniel drove to visit his father. Traffic moved slowly, and his thoughts were heavy. He had ended another relationship that morning, the 4th one in 2 years. He told himself that the woman had been too demanding, too emotional, or simply not compatible. But a quiet voice inside him whispered a different truth. The relationships had not failed because of them. They had failed because of him. When Daniel arrived at the old house, Joseph opened the door with a smile that carried both warmth and fatigue. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one Daniel had eaten breakfast at as a child. The wood had scratches and stains that held the history of their family. Joseph poured 2 cups of tea and asked his son how he had been. Daniel hesitated. He wanted to be honest, but he did not know how. He said only that life had been busy and that he was trying to figure things out. Joseph listened carefully. He always did. After a long silence, Daniel finally asked the question that had been growing inside him for months. He asked his father how he had managed to stay married for over 50 years. He asked how Joseph had kept his promise when modern marriages were breaking so easily. He asked why relationships today fell apart so quickly, while the marriages of the past seemed stronger and more resilient. Joseph leaned back in his chair and looked at his son with gentle eyes. He spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. He said the world his son lived in was very different from the world he had grown up in. He explained that the foundation of relationships had changed, not because love itself had changed, but because people's expectations had changed. Joseph told him that in his generation, people did not expect marriage to make them happy. They expected marriage to challenge them, shape them, and demand the best of them. They entered marriage understanding that love was a decision repeated every day, not a feeling that lasted only during good times. He said that people stayed together not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Joseph looked at the photograph on the wall as he spoke. He remembered the long years of labor, the nights when money ran low, the arguments, the illnesses, the days when he felt so tired he could barely stand. He remembered the mistakes he had made and the forgiveness he had been given. He remembered his wife's patience, her sacrifices, and the countless times she chose the family over her own comfort. He told Daniel that every marriage had storms. Some storms lasted days, some lasted years. Enduring them required commitment, not convenience. In his generation, people understood that marriage was not supposed to be an endless romance. It was supposed to be a partnership built on loyalty, duty, and respect. Daniel listened closely, but he felt something inside him resist the idea of enduring discomfort. His generation had been taught to avoid pain, not to walk through it. Joseph saw this conflict in his son's eyes. He smiled sadly because he understood something Daniel had not yet learned. Modern marriages were failing not because love was weaker, but because people were less willing to withstand hardship. The culture had shaped them into consumers instead of builders. Relationships had become products, and when a product no longer satisfied, people were taught to replace it instead of repair it. Joseph explained that many modern marriages began with unrealistic expectations. People looked for perfection instead of character. They expected passion to last forever. They expected their partners to fulfill every emotional need. When reality did not match the fantasy, they believed something was wrong. In his time, couples accepted that boredom, conflict, and frustration were natural phases, not signs of failure. He also said that divorce had become easier, legally and socially. In the 1970s, no-fault divorce laws allowed marriages to end simply because one person felt unhappy. The stigma that once encouraged couples to work through challenges had disappeared. Society now encouraged people to pursue personal happiness rather than honor commitments. Marriage had shifted from a duty to an option. Daniel felt the truth of these words settle heavily on his heart. He realized that he had ended relationships the moment they became difficult. He had looked for ease instead of endurance. He had been searching for a partner who required no effort, no adjustment, no sacrifice. He wanted love that never demanded anything from him. But that love did not exist. Joseph continued speaking softly. He said modern culture was built on instant gratification. People could order food, entertainment, transportation, and companionship with a few taps on a screen. They expected the same speed and convenience in relationships. They did not want to invest time or patience. They did not want to face their own flaws or work through disagreements. They preferred the illusion of choice to the reality of commitment. The old man placed his hand on his son's shoulder. He said marriages failed today because people entered them without learning the skills required to make them last. Skills like communication, forgiveness, humility, and consistency. He said love was not a fire that burned on its own. It was a fire that needed tending, or it would die. Daniel's eyes grew glassy. He felt both shame and clarity. He asked his father if he believed modern people were doomed to failed relationships. Joseph shook his head. He said anyone could build a strong marriage, but they had to unlearn many things and choose a harder path. They had to treat love as a responsibility rather than an experience. They had to value duty over desire. Daniel left the house late that night. The road home seemed longer than usual. He kept thinking about his father's words. When he returned to his apartment, he found himself staring at his own reflection in the window. He wondered whether he had ever truly loved anyone, or if he had simply been looking for comfort, without cost. Weeks passed. Joseph grew older and more fragile. Daniel visited him more often, driven partly by worry and partly by the conversations that had begun reshaping his understanding of life. They talked about relationships, family, and the meaning of commitment. Daniel felt something shifting inside him, something he had not felt in years. He felt the desire to build something lasting. One morning, Daniel received a call. His father had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Daniel drove to the house with a heaviness he had never known. The rooms were silent. The air felt colder without Joseph's presence. On the table beside the armchair, Daniel found the photograph from 1963. It showed a man who had kept his promises, a man who had carried the weight of his family with honor, a man who had lived a life with meaning. Daniel sat down in the old chair and held the photograph in his hands. He felt an ache in his chest, not only because he missed his father, but because he finally understood what Joseph had been trying to teach him. He realized that a life built on convenience would crumble at the first sign of pressure. A life built on duty would endure. He understood now why modern marriages failed. They failed because people entered them expecting ease. They failed because people wanted love without sacrifice. They failed because people valued individual desires more than shared responsibility. They failed because people walked away instead of working through challenges. They failed because the culture encouraged self over service. Daniel stayed in the house for hours. He thought about his future. He thought about the kind of man he wanted to become. He realized he no longer wanted endless options. He wanted something real, something permanent, something worth carrying. As evening settled, Daniel placed the photograph back on the wall. He whispered a promise to himself and to the memory of his father. He promised to build what his father had built. He promised to love, not with fleeting emotion, but with steady commitment. He promised to choose responsibility over convenience. He promised to carry the weight. The world outside continued to move at a frantic pace. People swiped through faces, searching for something they could not name. But Daniel walked out of the house with a new understanding. He knew that love was not found in endless choices. It was found in one choice made every day. A choice to stay, a choice to work, a choice to keep a promise. And in that choice, he discovered the secret his father had always known. Love lasts when people are willing to carry the burden together.